Behold Jerusalem. Found. The zodiacal miracle in the map of Britain and Northern Ireland and its message for our time. By Graham K. Griffiths. Chapter 3 Capricorn. The broken horn of plenty? What's poetry if it isn't something that has to fight for the unseen against the seen, for the dead against the living, for the mysterious against the obvious? It's the only lost cause we've got left. It fights for the impossible. A Glastonbury Romance, John Cowper Powys. General area, from its fish tail, marked by Canterbury in the east, to as far west as the Bristol Channel. Stow in the Wold marks the most northerly point of her arched back. To my eyes the Capricorn figures at both Glastonbury and Preseli are more akin to unicorn fish than goatfish, and I see Albion's version as no different. Thus, and for what must be a good reason, Capricorn is stamped 3 times upon the face of the planet as a splendid mythological unicorn, though one born of the waves and of all psychological and spiritual deep waters, a moonlit nightmare. Witness a creature fetched from the dreamtime and which, for age upon age, represented the height of purity. To glimpse a unicorn was always a sign that one was near the very borders of paradise itself, those pastures of primordial bliss. And I think its meaning is no less so here, seen bucking the foundations of these southern counties of Albion. For you to see her now is confirmation that you and your child within are already 3 giant strides over that same fabled border and ready now to chase, not only rainbows, but a unicorn too. Hunting the not so impossible. Just observe the dynamics of her, how her great back arches as she frolics in the waves alongside the hull of the ark. Her bold head tucked upside down as though thrusting that mystic horn into the foaming English Channel. Sure, a fabulous sight, but remember we are hunters, a reported sighting of her is no good to us, we want the scent of her, want to know where she's been and where she might be wanting to lead our thoughts, we certainly want to know whether she has any geological markings, or any of those disarming nameplays, like we found on the first 2 signs, that could again confirm the impossible. We need all this to track down the reason for her sudden arrival in our very own backyards, where we thought the border of paradise could never be. Being fairly well acquainted with this part of the country, I needed no research to find my first half clue. Upon her back she carries the aptly named Veil of the White Horse, where a gigantic image of a white horse has been beautifully cut out of the turf, to expose the underlying white chalk. Of course I instantly wondered whether, like that same geological whiteness, which so brilliantly paints that dove of Libra, there was here, too, poetic confirmation of this wonder horse's own milk-white flesh rippling but an inch or 2 under the green. Spurred on, my research into this ancient art form of exposing white figures by cutting away the turf was itself to reveal that, although practiced in other parts of the country, it was very much concentrated in this unicorned area, where the local speciality was to cut images of white horses. Indeed, I was to learn that another 14 such horses of differing ages strode over this same mystic beast, each of them still filling us with the same awe as that first one at Uffington did when it shone out clean and new beneath an Iron Age moon. More uncanny still, however, was my further discovery that all but one of these 15 white horses are in the half of this sign, which is the horse, its fish tail, I believe, only giving a home to one. Why? My inner voice offers up a tantalizing reason of its own. For instance, were the people who cut these white horses subconsciously prompted by that force which was at work shaping the greater white horse beneath their feet? And was this part and parcel of that same sympathetic magic, which inspired someone to come up with the name Dover to emphasize where a dove perched on the hand of Noah, or another to name I almost exactly where an eye should be on the face of Sagittarius? And what sympathy? Even geologically speaking, with the emphasis on the logical, and this only the 3rd giant into our journey through 16, this uncanny land poetry seems so tailored to each giant that at least 2 out of the 16 who could rightfully demand to be painted white, Libra and Capricorn, just so happen to be located where the underlying whiteness of the land is a renowned feature. Indeed, from this unicorn's ear eastwards, thus taking in all her body, the cliffs themselves begin to acquire an increasing whiteness until going solid white at the Isle of Wight and Dover. However, from that same ear tip westwards, and therefore along the underbelly of Pisces, one would return with the equivalent of only a few buckets full of whiteness, and this only from the area of Beer and but an ear twitch west of Seaton, which tips the ear. We shall later see how, delightfully, the ear tip of the Lamb of Aries is also white. Thus, whether by suggestive earth colorings or place name clues, it all seems cunningly maneuvered not only to embellish the giant in question, but also to bolster its actual presence so that by the end of our journey it will be hard to wave all aside as the coincidental slips and slides of tongues and sedimentary deposits. Rather we will see it as being intelligently orchestrated by what must be one vast and loving mind, a mind that has for eons harnessed everything from the minuscule works of worms to the thunderous movements of landslides to shape this dazzling picture message, to the effect that everything, but everything, is aware like we never knew, and what is more is trying urgently to communicate with man via this same picture sign language. Yesterday, I know, we could easily have turned away from this with a deaf ear and a condescending chuckle. We could have waved away the whole absurd proposition as new ageist pie in the sky. This morning, however, especially with the growing signs that our planet is being pushed out of balance, I propose that the pie is in our faces. Look at the map. To deny it is to deny the nose on your face. Something extraordinary has happened, and the disarming poetry of it will not go away. Poetry, which may or may not include these 15 white horses cut into the head and shoulders of a 180-mile-long wonder horse. Imagine, however, if these same white mares were, say, dotted over the figure of Taurus of Leo, a poetic disaster. That said, and having just put forward a case perhaps for the poetic input of these chalk horses, I have to admit that not one of them has a horn or fish tail. And so with tail slightly edging between my own legs, the still amused, an undeterred 11-year-old dared me to see whether there were any place names on this mare that could, like I, straight of Dover a dove, Isle of Wight a white, give me my goosebumps back. By taking up the challenge, I knew that here was going to be another defining moment of either my madness or this miracle's reality. I also knew only too well the kind of guy I was, in a word, fickle, and if nothing breathtaking was waiting for me out there to confirm, big time, that I was walking upon a fabulous creature with a mythological tale to tell, then no matter what wonderful finds I'd already stashed in my knapsack, I would tip its contents over the nearest cliff and get the hell back to my studio. For what was already hanging on my wall was madness enough for any man. In short, I needed one hell of a confidence booster to keep me going, otherwise I'd think the kid within really had been kidding me. With adrenaline pumping again, and in less than 5 minutes, both dreamer and fickle graphic designer had raced 180 miles from tail to head and, having found nothing, were in danger of falling off the last curls of her frothy mane and into the Bristol Channel, with an accompanying damping of my spirits. And yet somewhere deep within me I just knew that even at this seemingly dead end the land would present me with something marvelous. I felt that I was being toyed with, my renowned fickleness being laughingly teased as though by some clever magician, who would take me to the very edge of disappointment purely to make the result of the final circle of his wand the more spectacularly rewarding. And so it was to be, for just as I was to tumble, doubting, off the cliff, I was grabbed by my neck and hoisted firmly upon her great mane. For there upon the last western curl of this flicking mane was a place name fit to rid this graphic designer's fickleness for the rest of his journey into a new way of perceiving this planet, for there laughing in his face was the astonishing confirmation of Western Supermare. I laughed until I cried. If this was madness, it was too beautiful for me to want to return to sanity. Again I sat back and imagined if such a graphic label had been found upon the head of Aries or Pisces, disappointment guaranteed. But no, all these clues have been dropped exactly where they should be in order to both spur on and delight a traveler with new eyes. Many weeks later I was to stumble over another wonderful place name upon the very horn itself, and which was to be the icing on this particular cake, but I'll leave that one waiting to the end of this chapter and a final flourish of my own wand regarding this super mare. Goat or unicorn? 2 horns or 1? And so with such an incredibly precise signpost indicating exactly what we travelers now stand upon, let us once more prepare to delve into mythology in an effort not only to decipher just what this creature has to add to the overall message, but maybe, too, why a unicorn supermare has taken the place of Capricorn's traditional goat, for our final mythological interpretation will depend upon it. So first, let's see her true breed. Yet again the resemblance of Albion's Capricorn to that of Glastonbury and Preseli is tantalizingly close, although to be perfectly honest, I rate this figure, along with Scorpio, as the two least like their counterparts in those other two zodiacs. Having said that, and again to my eyes, all three versions seem far more unicorn-ish than goat-ish. Why? Well, count their horns for yourself, one each I take it. In my book that makes them all unicorns. Admittedly, in the mythology of the stars my push for a single-horned unicorn over a double-horned goat would seem to be on somewhat dodgy ground. A unicorn has never ever been mentioned as having anything to do with Capricorn. Indeed, its goatish claims are amplified by the Greeks who saw Capricornus as the star cluster which Zeus gave as a gift to the she-goat, Nympha Malthica, for having nursed the god when he was a baby, along with her own son Pan. Is this a massive vote in favor of two horns over one, then? Seems so, but first hear the rest of the myth. It seems Amalthea had fed both babies from her celestial horn, her cornucopia from which flowed inexhaustible nourishment and wisdom. Her magic horn was only ever spoken of in the singular, so scope for a unicorn after all? So, I say again, it's Capricorn, the single-horned cornucopian sea unicorn for me. Although I have noticed that whenever Mary Kane stiffs the scent of a unicorn drifting in and out of Glastonbury's fields, she too locates one as possibly hiding in Capricorn's pastures, though I feel she'd always side with the goat over the unicorn, but I could be wrong. In only her second paragraph she refers to the horn of Glastonbury's own Capricorn as single, long and straight. It makes a unicorn out of Capricorn. Nor do I in any way wish to challenge the vision of the first star-seer, who joined up those starry dots that form heaven's Capricorn and proclaimed its head to be double-horned and thus a goat. However, that seemingly single line of stars that sprout from Capricorn's stately head in the examples I have found in books on astrology, see below, give the distinct impression that there's only one horn up there too. But then again, perhaps that ancient astrologer will turn around and advise me to better gauge the stars on earth and to leave those in heaven to him, for the land obviously has its own evolving tale to tell. Well said. However, before you decide which of us is right, it is as well to remember that in the days when men still believed in unicorns and claimed sightings of them when stalking in twilit woods, their description was often to the effect that the wonder horse had of all things a goatish head, albeit single-horned. What is more, its front feet were sometimes even reported as being cloven. Apparently then, unicorns seem always to have been shifting amalgams of both horse and goat. As for Capricorn, though, all schools of thought may now examine at first hand the fabulous creature that we found grazing in the rising mist of Albion, along with the following theory of Sesti. After relating another reason that the form of a goat occupies one half of Capricorn, he then seems to query whether there may yet be more mystery behind its pedigree. However, our Capricornus is much more ancient and the explanation of this figure is perhaps lost in the mists of time. So shame about the horn. Having then canvassed for a unicorn over a goat, I must confess that the only physical disappointment with Albion's magical beast is that unfortunately, it has a horn that is less than perfectly straight and not very long either. How hard it strives to take its form out of Sheasel Beach and Portland Bill but fails to make a straight and sharp job of it. In fact it seems almost chiseled in half. Or was it perhaps once majestically formed, but now that it has a message to bring? The earth needs us to see it as damaged? We shall look into this most important question shortly, but for now I'd like us to take our first look at the wonderfully interesting geological map of the United Kingdom, South, produced by the Institute of Geological Sciences, 3rd edition, 1979. This is a map that shows, in graphic blocks of color, the actual rock and sedimentary makeup of Britain. However, for us who now try to see beyond the ordinary, these same once fluid rivers of rock will be seen, time and again, almost to animate these giant figures of Albion. Indeed, in the case of Gemini's Griffin, it was solely this map that gave birth to him. the case of our sea unicorn, see how, from the far north and east of Britain, the differing sedimentary deposits seem pulled southwestwards and funneled, with what seems focused intent, directly into the very forehead and horn of this vibrant mare in the region of Lyme Regis. Moreover, the overall shape of this flow itself seems like a great inverted horn, a tornado of unicorn magic. It is also interesting that these same solidified flows seem especially to connect the heads of the Lamb of Aries and Sagittarius to this head of Capricorn. I didn't at first latch onto the possible purpose of this, but then I wondered if, instead of those frozen rivers of force being pulled towards the head of Capricorn, they were, on the contrary, being symbolically transmitted outwards from it towards those other two signs, as though they were perhaps feeding from the unicorn's fount of wisdom, that horn of plenty. And with that thought I remembered Amalthea. From our dissection of Sagittarius, remember how we found the Roman god Jupiter also embedded there? Well, the Greek equivalent of Jupiter was Zeus, yes, he who was suckled from the she-goat Amalthea's funnel-shaped cornucopia. That's not all. If this sedimentary tide really does strive to become a subtle subterranean retelling of that Greek myth, then we must find a Pan too, that other infant who suckled alongside Zeus, and so make the picture not just complete, but marvelously so. Well, we shall eventually find him, and startlingly so, within the shadow of the Christ on the cross in the station of Aries. Proudly cloven-footed he joyfully awaits us with others who, likewise, prepare to shock us rigid at the end of our journey. For now, though, just put in your knapsack the image of a unicorn horn being an agent of nourishment, an image perhaps now backed up by the poetic retelling of an archaic myth, remarkably spelt out in the sedimentary ebb tide that in the beginning gave rise to the extraordinary shape of this land for a reason. But I digress, easy to do when walking in Wonderland. No matter then how intriguing that subterranean artistry, we must still come back to the glaring fact that the Glastonbury and Preseli horns are very much more complete than this weird little stump of Albion's mare. And because the rest of this lovely figure is so clearly and faultlessly sculpted, as indeed are all the other signs to come, I can only feel that this damaged horn may yet have some significant message of its own to impart in aid of the greater picture. Nothing appears for nothing upon this prophetic landscape. Its injury is our injury, its healing will be our healing. Does its deformity, for instance, portray a now damaged cornucopia, a sign of today's many injurious acts against the land, and consequently against ourselves, resulting in a spiritual starvation of sorts? If so, can we again look towards finding verification of this in myth, or, dare I say, in myth wrapped up as religion? Let us look to religion first. Without doubt, the arrival of Christianity, coming as it did with the age of Pisces, although perhaps not at the outset, nevertheless signaled the rise of God the Father to the demise of God the Mother. And with that shift, nature, and the divinity once attached to it, was to be branded evil, thus communion between man, beast, and the land became outlawed. The feminine yin set against the masculine yang, the positive male polarity more valued than the negative female, and the father's white thought more holy than the mother's black. This unbalancing resulted, especially for us in the West, in our mass divorce from the environment, and with it the fount of any prospect of paradise on earth capped, left to sour, and become overgrown to the point where barely anyone could remember that it ever existed. Indeed, if it were not for the legacy of mythology, we today would have no conception of a state of paradise, not even of a thing called a unicorn. So, with this in mind, take another look at the cover, and suspecting this unicorn to be a creature perhaps with more affinity to the goddess and femininity, can we now see her actually charging into that next sign of Christianity-loaded Pisces? Such a clash would leave the wonder horn of the goddess's most wonderful beast broken, and men consequently blinded to the full magic of their spiritual kinship with nature, and so would it also leave the cornucopia broken. I don't know. I might be out of my ground, some would suggest even out of my tree, but confronted by such an overall miracle suddenly arrived upon our doorstep, we must all strive to find both rhyme and reason for it, however intellectually aggravating. For my own part, I have found that the deeper we go into the reason for the Earth's incredible shaping of Britain, the more this bridging of sundered opposites will take up our picture-prompted thoughts, becoming indeed the fundamental issue behind this whole conundrum. So does Albion illustrate a way to the bridging or rebalancing, a harmonious bringing together of the so-called female yin and male yang, the material and the spiritual, and is this the chemistry behind the Grail itself, indeed even the key to its actual attainment? Moving on, though still with the thought that her broken horn is the prime focus of what this sign wishes us most to muse upon, recommend that we should again dip into myth. Indeed, I think we should put a replica of her damaged horn into our knapsacks and carry it with us throughout the rest of our journey, wrap it in a soft cloth and, in doing so, have a will to try and mend it. Carry with it, too, a vital piece of ancestral belief regarding the magical properties of such a wonder horn when unbroken and spiraling proud, a belief that it was both a magical detector and cleanser of poison, especially in water. Keeping in mind the actual pose of Albion's unicorn, let's now glean more of this beast's water-conning capabilities. Our ancestors evoked an aura of purity and chastity around the unicorn, more than any other creature. This was perhaps crystallized in the folk memory from that moment when, either in dream or reality, someone somewhere watched a unicorn step down to a poisoned lake, where all the more mundane beasts waited thirstily on the banks, as though expectant of her coming. On arrival, she was seen to dip her horn into the polluted waters, which were immediately purified, enabling the rest of the animals to safely drink their fill. Visualize that scene whilst casting another look at the cover. Is not that tale being played out now by all the wondrous creatures of Albion? Just look how Capricorn in a powerful gesture dips her horn into the poisonous seas of our polluted planet. From this imagery, my own fathoming suggests that until men can believe in unicorns again, in the inherent holiness of every atom of this planet and in the belief that our dreams really can be made to get up and walk this beautiful planet, for our nightmares already do, then that broken horn, cornucopia, will remain as a curse upon creation. But how can we bring about a healing? I even wonder whether simply to acknowledge her pitiful horn, indeed, this whole miracle underfoot, may be to begin to mend it. For surely to see and believe in this miracle is to change overnight one's own perception of this earth, and then to perhaps awaken and demand more strongly than ever before the cleansing of the seas and the air, to passionately fight against the raping of the rainforests, and for God's sake plead for a halt to our scientists playing at God by the tampering with the gene. Such feelings were sparked for me, and I hope for you too, via the sight of what the land has done, and with it by the sudden and painful acknowledgement of the God that must always have been aware and singing out of everything, including ourselves, just like our ancestors believed. And I wonder too if we could mend our rift with nature, rejoin in our hearts the yin and yang, whether a paradise would begin to magically return all over the planet. Is not this wonder of Albion the very proof that it could? But getting back to the tale of the unicorn dipping its horn in water, I found a starry slant on it in my excellent source book The Lore of the Unicorn by Odell Shepherd. The author refers to the unicorn as being implicated with the moon and femininity and informs how, in ancient times, this union was seen as especially apparent in the similarity of that beast's single horn to that of the singular horned appearance of a new moon. The animal is most readily associated with the new or crescent moon, which might indeed seem to dwellers by the sea to be leading the stars down to the water and to dip its horn therein before they descend. For a second time I ask you, is not the entirety of Albion the exact pictorial portrayal of this scene? See Capricorn now justifiably leading down the very constellations to the sea, to earth. But there is yet more potential medicine to swallow. Wherever that unicorn was first glimpsed cleansing the lake, whether in some virgin forest at the time when all the world was young, or in a dream remembered and recounted by one enlightened to its portent, it was nevertheless a strong enough sighting to prompt many a paranoid petty prince and duke in 14th century Europe to have such a horn, albeit more often than not a fraudulent tusk of the narwhal, on their dining table in order to detect the poison in the goblet. To dip it in the spiked wine would cause the horn to perspire beads of a dew-like substance, would you believe? This healing horn did not just excel in the purification of water and wine, for it had other miraculous medicinal attributes too, though all antidotal in some characteristic. One of these beliefs, stemming from at least the 4th century BC, states how the horn was a deterrent against scorpions, and therefore of particular value to travelers of Albion who will eventually have to confront one in Northern Ireland. Indeed, one David de Pomis in 1587 proclaimed that for a horn to protect against scorpions, there is not money enough in the world to pay for it. Of course, I'm not advocating that we should all now run out and hunt high and low for a wand of this magical stuff. What I am trying to suggest, however, is that we travelers into a newer perception must hang on to the symbolic grain of wisdom, which may have prompted that belief into the cleansing and healing properties of the unicorn's horn in the first place. I recommend that these scraps of archaic lore, albeit at first glance seemingly foolish, should be also popped into your knapsack and kept for a rainy day, along with other fragments we shall collect along this same anciently trod way, for their eventual collective effect upon our understanding of this shocking sight of Albion might, in the end, prove again, not money enough in the world to pay for it. However, the best medicine of all is laughter. This admittedly offbeat and quirky wisdom, hidden away in rhymes and fireside tales, has always been as free as wild berries, and hung just as juicily right in front of our mostly upturned noses, ignored because it was free, too outlandishly colored, and seemingly the staple of old wives and peasants. More often than not, it was bypassed as not being serious food for thought. And so here are 4 more wild berries of unicorn lore, from out of whose juice we may be able to ferment both reason and cure for that broken horn. The first taste will, I know, add confusion to my earlier musings, which tended to view our unicorn as having feminine qualities, giving her an excuse for her wayward charge into the sign of Pisces and its Christian or masculine connotations, yet I must include it and leave you to press out whatever liquor it may hold. From the 13th to the 16th centuries, representation of the unicorn in ecclesiastic decoration was widespread throughout Europe, and often depicted in a scene of the so-called holy hunt, the capture of the beast being only possible via the gentle hand of a virgin, a lady often represented as the Virgin Mary. For the first taste of this particular berry I will let St. Ambrose provide both the question and answer, who is this unicorn, but the only begotten Son of God? Then there is a unicorn of Oriental belief, the Killin, and thought of as no less holy. From ancient China, Shepherd brings us a luscious fruit to the effect that the Killin is to come in the shape of an incomparable man, a revealer of the mysteries, supernatural and divine, and a great lover of all mankind. He is also supposedly expected to arrive in conjunction with the coming of a particular constellation. Interesting. Strangely then, in both East and West the unicorn has come to represent a Messiah figure. And I can but venture the question whether that constellation is Aquarius, which is not only the epitome of clear water, but, even as I write, is swinging into final position to inaugurate the new astrological age arriving with this new millennium. But I said the best medicine was laughter, so let me tell you that my young inner self and I giggled for an hour when sampling the next couple of berries. And their taste? Just pure unadulterated fun. Our first smile comes via a charming piece of old French prose romance called Le Chevalier du Papagao. In it we hear that King Arthur's ship, which could only be this Ark of Albion, sea Cancer, was once stranded high and dry and that it took a giant and a unicorn to drag it off the sandbank and back into deep water. Look then to the cover, doesn't that overall picture laughingly fit the prose? Mentally tie a rope around her neck while attaching the other end around the ark's figurehead and see how she too could be seen, without too much imagination, to be dragging the ship backwards off an imagined sandbank. She's certainly putting enough back into it. However, being not very practical, perhaps I've got myself in a wee bit of a tangle by suggesting that we tie a rope around the neck of the beast, for surely that would strangle her. So let's seek further advice on such matters with a dip into the Hebrew Talmudic writings for the last berry and the best giggle. Now, as odd as this suggestion may sound, I would ask you to bear with me, for I'll show you something that may give both rhyme and amusing reason for the awkward sight of a unicorn with a poor damaged horn, and at slopping fish tail. It goes something like this. We are taken back to the day the Ark set sail and, in particular, to the trouble with one of its passengers, a mysterious single-horned creature called a riem, which, whether unicorn or not, was later, and with divine providence for me, officially classified as such. Here, then, the map of Albion laugh under the beautiful and comical weight of the following description. It tells us that the size of this riem unicorn was out of all reasonable compass, indeed, So tall was she that clouds rolled along her back. Well then, if Albion's Riem stood up, we'd see her tower some 96 miles high, more than tall enough to cause havoc with air traffic control. Though the best bit is when we are told that she was too large to be got into the ark, as is Albion's Riem, and so, wait for it, she had to be towed along behind by a cord tied to her horn. If you can't believe in this yarn, step back and see the truth as hammered into these walls of Albion. See how easy it is to visualize Capricorn being awkwardly dragged by the ark, and boy what a massive ark it would have been, and so little wonder why the middle part of her horn seems rope-burned away, as the ark tugged her colossal weight through the mountainous waves of the deluge and may do so again. From this news can we also deduce a reason for her fish tail, for in those deep waters surely such would be far more used than hind legs. For me, I think we are witnessing mythology get up and dance, and this is surely for one hell of a reason. And although we are only 3 steps into forming a picture of that reason, the first 3 pictographs, it must be said, all spell flood. And there the laughter stops. But whether you see true mythological cause for that damaged horn in the above scraps of ancestral lore, or take on board my own hunch that it may be injured as a pointer towards our own lost sense of spirituality and kinship towards the land, I think that that less than perfect horn is meant to be the absolute focus point of Capricorn's message to us. To reflect on this defect will, however, give credence to her wonderful presence in Albion's south, which, in turn might give her back her magic, and you the opportunity of being nourished as the god you are from that single-horned cornucopia of forgotten wisdom. The deeper we ponder the mythology of the unicorn, the quicker she may lead us through the thicket of our ignorance to the realization that our holy hunt is not to capture her, but to get just a glimpse, for in such a sighting is to win the release of the entangled child within, the one who dreamt this fabulous creature in the first place, a dream which the planet has now glorified as no dream at all, but a universal truth, a medicine, a salve, to a wounded mankind and a poisoned planet. Defining the body. We shall now unravel that which our adult sensibilities tell us cannot be. We'll begin with her great head, so, start at Seaton in Devon, which is the tip of her ear. Now follow the whitening coast eastwards. Chesil Beach and Lime Bay between them give her that long and straight forehead, but do not continue so as to furnish her with an equally long and straight horn. This becomes stunted and deformed at Portland Bill, a place where man's own works strangely echo the imagery to which the land here seems to be drawing our attention. This poetically broken horn is physically underlined by the major quarrying taking place here for its famous yellowish-white Portland stone, which is extensively used in buildings throughout Britain. Further signs of damage? Sense, too, another echo of that underlying spiritual damage when hearing how for many years her horn was not only home to Her Majesty's warships, but to one of her prisons too. A wound then poetically pointing to the damage we have done not only to the planet, but to ourselves. We now go around the horn's tip, past Weymouth to Swanage on the end of her snorting nose, which curls round into a fabulous sea-foamed mouth. Hamworthy is on her tongue, a place from where you can almost hear her jubilant whinny. From Poole on her chin, head inland to Sturminster Marshall and follow the River Stour to Sturminster Newton. This line gives us the lower jaw contour and completes her head. Even where her mane must flick over her broad rocking horse forehead seems clued into the scheme of things, Broadmain is the village that marks it. Her eye is Dorchester. Now to draw what is for me one of the subtlest yet most powerful parts of this entire zodiac, her bent-up foreleg, so splendidly characteristic of early depictions of the heavenly Capricorn, see following engraving. Start 50 miles inland at Marlborough, heading south on the A346 and A338 to Salisbury, then continue alongside the River Avon down to Ringwood. Here curve east on the A31 to Junction 2 on the M27, this is the lower tip of her hoof. Now go south again via Totton and follow Southampton Water into the Solent. Curl west and you will see just how perfectly the river Beaulieu draws the top of the hoof. Still with the leg, go west now along the coast, but at Boscombe turn inland and pick up the A338, A35, and A350 to draw a lovely bent knee. At Sturminster Marshall take the unmarked road northeast to Bradbury Rings. Unfortunately these rings and the Roman road we are to follow next are not marked on the Michelin map. When my eye first took this line I thought it was a touch of artistic license as there was absolutely nothing there to guide me. Imagine my delight in finding later, on another map, the old Bradbury Rings as a focal point to some Roman roads. The one we take to complete this full leg contour heads towards Sixpenny Handley. My thanks to the Romans. And just compare those legs. Take a break now to compare the 1603 engraving below to this creature of Albion. I know it's stubbornly double-horned, but just compare those tucked-up forelegs. That tail isn't a bad copy either. As we gaze at such land wizardry, however, never forget that, as in the case of all Albion's giants, it is the actual coastline which initially begets the immovable profile, thus there is absolutely no artistry from yours truly. I only held a pencil and traced what was there, and let's face it, a child could do that. So with that leg, this fabulous beast is, for me, quite finished. I've seen enough to know what the land requires me to know. However, for the purists, let us now complete her by heading deep inland. Return to the tip of her ear at Seaton and there pick up the River Axe inland to Axminster. Here take the unmarked road to Membury and beyond so as to cross over the A30 and meet up with the A308. The River Yardley follows a similar path. Once on the A303, head southwest, but soon pick up the B3170 to Taunton. Take now the A358 to Willerton, skirting the Quantock Hills. At Willerton it's the A39 back to Bridgewater where we can take the River Perrott into Bridgewater Bay. Flow northwards now with the River Severn all the way to Gloucester, but do look over your shoulder at her lovely flowing mane drawn by the coastline, especially those flicking curls at Weston-super-Mare, and I still can't believe that name. Brenne Down and Sandpoint mark other curly tips. At Gloucester take the A436 to Andoversford, then the B4068 to Stow-on-the-Wold. The A436 to Oddington and the River Evenlode then jointly take us to the River Thames at Oxford, the old man himself floating us leisurely down to Reading. Back on the road again we're off the A329 to junction 3 of the M3 hoping to join the M25 near Chertsey. Follow this to Maidstone where we need the A249 to junction 5 on the M2 and on to Canterbury. This marks the top tip of the fish tail from where you may take either the A28 or the Great Stour River down to Ashford. All that's left now is the A2070, and A259 to Hastings where it's over to that master template cutter of the coastline west to Southampton and thus completion. The place of her heart. Magnificent Stonehenge could well be her heart, but in my own heart of hearts I believe that this honour lies with the equally impressive circle of Avebury, where stones were hoisted far earlier than Stonehenge and, at the time of writing, are all still touchable. My preference for a heart at Avebury, however, is based only upon a snippet I saw in the Acorn Book of Birthing the Cosmic Child, and I quote, "If Avebury means buried heart, perhaps this is a place where our hearts will awaken and we can once again feel and breathe with the whole universe." Interesting too, the same piece goes on to say, Grace Cook, a well-known clairvoyant, sensed that the place on Earth which receives the greatest concentration of incoming energies from the stars is Avebury. With that I think there is a very beautiful end to any debate as to where the heart might be, but before I leave the issue altogether I have another snippet, which pertains to the magic that may be found here. In Wolfram von Eschenbacher's Parsifal, the story of Sir Percival's quest for the Grail, we are told that the wound of Amphotas, the Grail King, could only be cured by several strange medicines, one of which being the heart of a unicorn. This wound is sometimes translated as being at one and the same time the very land itself. Thus, if that which lies buried at Avebury can cure the injured land in the shape of the Grail King, it may at the same time, too, perhaps help heal that mirrored and consequential wound in us all. Lastly, that icing on the cake, or in this case the icing on the horn. Remember my rush to find a place name on this creature fit to blow my mind and thus keep me on the trail? Well, I missed one. And if you have any lingering doubts about what we've just hiked over, then this one should finally blow them away. Let me, then, twirl my wand and tell you that upon the horn itself there are only 3 place names marked, the most prominent being Fortune's Well. And if its breakdown of Well of Fortune doesn't excite you, especially after all we've talked about, then let me tell you that the mystic Kabbalists assign to Capricorn the 10th trump of the tarot, the Wheel of Fortune. I take it that man's future fortune really is well and truly tied up with this horn. On we go now, westwards into Pisces. Tracking the boy Jesus into the eye of Pisces.